Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of The Chocolate Life Live. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm the creator and the moderator of TheChocolateLife.com, and I want to welcome everybody who is joining me today for this live stream. No matter whether you're watching on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook, please take a moment. I appreciate it if what you do is you go like and subscribe. Like this stream, subscribe to the channel. In the comments, please let us know where you are listening from today, whether it's Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, where that is, and where in the world you are. I'd really appreciate your support in helping grow the channel and supporting the work that I do. And with all that out of the way, what I want to do is I want to introduce the topic for today, which is about debunking some claims about chocolate. And it's important to me to do that. I work really, really hard to make sure that I get the facts straight. I work really, really hard to make sure that I try to communicate clearly about what it is that I'm trying to say, what it is that I'm trying to get across. And it is a real challenge to me when there are people who are making claims about cocoa and chocolate. They're not being as rigorous. I think that's probably the best way to describe it. They're not as rigorous as I am, and making sure that what they say is in fact true and correct. And as I said in the opening, the misinformation, or said in the opening to the post, is that misinformation travels 6 times faster than the truth. And once misinformation gets into the brain, it's really, really hard to dislodge. And that's why I'm doing it today. I'm taking a look at a bunch of claims which I found on the internet, and want to give you my take on what's wrong with them, and provide you some background and suggest that when you do run across a claim, and what you want to do is what I think you want to do is I think you want to be very, very careful about whether or not you're going to accept that claim, and to go and do some of your homework. And that's it for today. And before we get started, I want to say to Samuel, who says hello, thank you very much for joining us here today on the Chocolate Life Live. So I'm going to reorganize my screen here for a second, and I have to look away from the camera because I've got another screen that I'm sharing here. And this is going to be a challenge for you all to read. If you have 2 screens that you're working with, you can go to TheChocolateLife.com. Let's do that. You can go to TheChocolateLife.com, the homepage. What you can do is we have the post for today's live stream, which is here. You can click on that, and then you can scroll down, and you'll see that below this block of text, there's a link to the page from which I took the text. So you can go there and you can read this along. But let's go take a look at what it is that Sunstar Organics is talking about their products. And let's just dive in. So number 1, it says Ecuadorian Arriba Criollo Cacao. So number 1 is that Arriba is the name given to the flavor which is specific to Ecuadorian Nacional cacao. Nacional is the variety, right? It's also important to know that Nacional is not a genetic Criollo, right? Nacional fits within the classification, what's called the structure group of Forastero cacaos, right? So right off the bat, Arriba Criollo cacao, we have at least 2 misrepresentations of what it is that's going on here. It is not a Criollo, it is a Nacional. And Arriba is the name that's given to the flavor for Nacional. So there is a way in which we might think about Criollo, and that is Criollo is just a word that means native or from here. And so we can use Criollo in sort of linguistic way, sort of like abuelo. So the cocoa that my grandfather grew. And so in that respect, and we find that the word Criollo is used a lot in Peru and in Ecuador. You ask somebody what they're growing, they'll say they're growing Criollos. And what they mean is I'm growing the cocoa that my grandfather grew, not necessarily that I'm growing genetic Criollos. So number 1 is Nacional, not Criollo. Number 2 is Arriba is just a Spanish word that means go. for the most part. And it refers to the fact that when traders came to the port of Guayaquil on the Guayas River, they'd go, hey, where's all the good cocoa? And everybody would say, arriba, arriba, go upriver to the town of Vinces. And that's where the name Arriba came to be associated with the Nacional Canal cacao of Ecuador. So very, very simple stuff, but there is no such thing as Ecuadorian Arriba Criollo cacao. It doesn't exist. Why would these people want to use this? Because Criollo has a particular mystique in the chocolate community, and people know what Arriba is because of the association with Arriba Nacional. We don't have to go much further into this description to find that there is another problematic association. It's not one that you would necessarily be aware of, and I don't necessarily know that they're aware of, but it's really important because they say that their cacao is grown in high elevation, highly mineralized volcanic soil. Now, what that means is that there's a very, very high likelihood of cadmium concentration in the cocoa beans. And so what I would want to do is they talk about certification for organic and kosher. They say it exceeds fair trade standards. I don't know what that means in this particular case. But if it is in fact grown in highly mineralized volcanic soils, this would need to be tested for cadmium. And nowhere here, they make other kinds of claims for other contaminants in the cocoa, but they never talk about the cadmium content or any other heavy metal content. So is there in fact any, would there in fact be lead in this? It's a real interesting oversight that I don't know if they're thinking about. I mean, I believe the company, the chocolate is made in California. There is a proposition in California having to do with cadmium in cocoa. And this, if it's sold in California, would have to subscribe to the laws having to do with cadmium in California. So I'm really, really confused about that representation. I want to say hello to Barefoot Chocolatini, who's joining us. Thank you very much. All the way from the Hawaiian Islands, 6-hour time difference, 6 o'clock in the morning. Thank you very much for getting up and joining us here today. And the comment, for clarification about Ecuadorian Arriba Criollo, it makes no sense. What's interesting, they do talk about down here Arriba Nacional cacao beans. And so, okay, I mean, they do know it. It is here buried in the text, but it's not up front. So the next thing that I want to point out that's sort of problematic with what's going on here is that they say that the trees are a minimum of 30 years old, and some of them are as old as 80 years. So the Nacional trees are going to take between 5 and 8 years to become fully productive. They might start hitting their sort of peak stride in terms of productivity around 20 years. By the time they get to be 30 years, productivity is likely to be falling off. And at 80 years, the trees are probably not as nearly as productive as they should be. If I had an 80-year-old tree in my farm, what I would probably do is I might graft new material onto the existing trunk so that I don't have to start it from scratch. But I would definitely look at the productivity of the trees and say, this one is declining. And what I would do is I would replace that tree with new material, which is likely to be hardier and more productive. It's not necessarily something that I would advocate as a positive attribute of the trees. Again, if I don't know anything about cacao, then I go, oh, wow, that's really, really interesting. The fact that these trees are 80 years old, that must be good, right? And it turns out that it's not. So the water source is rain or deep mountain spring water. That's pretty good. Never from irrigation or potentially contaminated rivers and streams. It's sort of misleading. If I do have a deep mountain spring, I could irrigate from my deep mountain spring. There's nothing inherently wrong with irrigation. If you're going through a dry spell, being able to irrigate is a really good idea. And so, that's very, very cool to think about. You do have to worry about potential contamination from rivers and streams. There are lots of different kinds of contamination, but I would wonder if the contamination actually is something that is taken up into the trees and then makes it into the pods. Not all forms of contamination might be. And then, of course, we do need to worry about the heavy metal contamination in this highly mineralized volcanic soil that I think would overcome almost any other form of contamination, which might come from irrigation water. So they say they select pods, never acquire pods from aggregators. So there's no possible cross-contamination with the CCN51. So with any other cocoa bean. So they're saying they only use Criollo cacaos. I have no way of knowing if they've done genetic testing on this or if they're just looking at the morphology of the pods to determine that this is in fact Criollo. I have no way of knowing, but the idea of going out of the way to make sure that there's no other genetic material, that's a great idea. So kudos to them if they're able to do that. 100% raw from start to finish. I've done a whole lot of discussion on raw and what raw means and whether or not things are raw from start to finish. If that's of interest to you, I would want to know from them what are the testing procedures that they go through to ensure that the temperature never goes above whatever their definition of raw is. So if it's above 118 degrees Fahrenheit, or if it's above 114 or 110. And by the way, that's really hard to do when you're drying the cocoa. If you're putting it out in the sun, if they say it's always sun-dried, then the chance that the temperature gets above 125 Fahrenheit, 50 degrees centigrade, or thereabouts is really, really quite easy to do, and you have to be very, very careful. The next claim is really interesting because it talks about phytic acid. And so, okay, so I did a little search on phytic acid, and we can find about phytic acid levels in cocoa and other kinds of trees. Other kinds of plants, we find out that cocoa does have phytic acid in it. It says that the raw cocoa beans are high in phytic acid. However, when the beans are fermented, the phytic acid level is decreased, so it's lowered. We don't know that it goes to zero. And here's in that same search, we find that is a question about, is cacao carcinogenic, which people have said that cacao is a carcinogen. It says cacao contains cadmium. This is another misrepresentation. Cacao can contain cadmium if it's grown in soils which are cadmium rich. We find those mostly in the Americas. It's rare to find a cacao which is contaminated with cadmium when it comes from West Africa. And there are places in the Americas where there's very little cadmium, or there's no cadmium in the soil, lots of parts of Brazil, for example. So it also increases the risk of cancer. So I think they're referring to cadmium. They're not referring to the cacao itself. So we're trying to parse this claim about phytic acid. We do some research about what is phytic acid and what does it mean. And it turns out that if you actually go take a look at phytic acid, for the most part, what you do is you find, if you go look at sort of like PubMed or places like that, so places where I expect to find some, authenticated medical research, it's less clear about what's going on. So studies on phytic acid reveal that for some people, phytic acid blocks calcium, zinc, magnesium, iron, and copper absorption. Right. So a bad thing about phytic acid is that if you are looking at cacao as a source of magnesium and as a source of trace metals in your diet, then having a cacao which has a lot of phytic acid in it would be counterproductive. It would take the levels that would be available for absorption in your body and it would reduce them. And so it says here, phytic acid free. And so I don't know how much we can rely on this, but it does say that fermentation reduces phytic acid. I don't know how you would guarantee that something is phytic acid free without having a very, very sensitive test, but I'd like to know how they know that their cocoa is phytic acid free. There's also been some question about what the pH of phytic acid is. It's around 5.5. Neutral pH is 7. And it turns out the cacao pulp is around 2.5 or 3. Your stomach acid is in that 2.5. Cacao is like 3.5. Your stomach is 2.5. So you need to be very, it's like, is something which has got a pH of 5, is it going to continue, as some of these sites have said, will it contribute to gastroesophageal reflux disease or acid reflux? The answer is probably not, because the acid is in there. So I would recommend, what I haven't added this living with phytic acid link into here, into the post. I will do that after the live stream, so you can go and look at this and then go figure out for yourself what you think about this. So how much phytic acid is there in cocoa to begin with? Is phytic acid reduced during the process of fermentation? Is the effect of some small amount of phytic acid as detrimental as the claims are to suggest that being phytic acid free, is it important? I don't know the answer to that question, but it's something that I'm tempted to say that this phytic acid talking point is just that, a talking point. Is something that people in certain areas of the health food community talk about, the natural foods world and the dark corners of these parts of the world talk about. And so there's just, phytic acid is bad for you. It doesn't matter. It's just phytic acid is bad for you. You want to avoid phytic acid. And so I think that may be one of the reasons why it is presented here the way that it is. I want to take a quick break and say hello to Encore Coffee, who's connecting here from Kansas City. Now, is that Kansas City, Kansas, or Kansas City, Missouri? Because it's really important to know about the difference between those two. But no matter whether it's Kansas City, Missouri, or Kansas City, Kansas, thanks for checking in today, Encore Coffee. So, we're just 4 or 5 lines into this and already have a lot of really interesting questions about it. The next one is, they say there are 0 jitters due to a complete lack of mycotoxins, mold, yeast, and fungus, right? So we can do some research. We can go and look at the Double World Health Organizations, and we can look about what mycotoxins are and what might be some of the side effects. Now, I think it's really important that what we do is we go to sources of information which are likely to be peer-reviewed and likely to be scientifically accurate, rather than what we're doing is we're looking at sites which may not have the level of rigor associated with peer-reviewed scientific study. So we can look at the side effects for what mycotoxins are, where we might find that there are challenges associated with them. Now, to the best of my knowledge, and the reading that I've done on this over the course of the last dozen years, is that when it comes to cacao, from a mycotoxin perspective, we probably need to be more careful about aflatoxins and ochratoxins. They can be a challenge. And so if you're buying cacao from someone, you want what is called a certificate of analysis from your provider. That certificate of analysis will tell you what the level of aflatoxin and ochratoxin is going to be in the cocoa beans. That test is part of what's called phytosanitary certification. It is almost universally required for export. If you're at all worried about it, you should ask your provider of cocoa for a phytosanitary certificate for export, right? So ochratoxins, aflatoxins can have kidney damage, can damage the kidneys. This is a good resource. Again, it's not in the post. I will put it in the post after I get off the live stream today. But the point here being is, okay, the assertion here is about mycotoxins, and what they're talking about, jitteriness due to complete lack of mycotoxins. And I take a look here, and I don't find anything about a central nervous system response having to do with jitteriness in any of the reading that I have done on this. So I did just a little broader Google search, right? And so the effects of mycotoxins on the endocrine systems, how mold toxicity affects hormones, what are the effects, And when we look at the sources here, we've got PubMed from the National Institutes of Health, right? This is a place that I would go and say, hey, the information that is here is likely to be one that is likely to be information that I can rely on as being scientifically accurate. I come here and look at Dr. Lamb Coaching. I have no idea what his medical background is. I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying it's bad. I have no idea. What I'd want to do is I'd want to look at what it is that he's saying and find out what the primary resources are. So what are the primary sources of information? So if they make a claim about X or Y or Z, where is the primary source that backs up the claim that is being made about things? And I think this is really, really important. Also the same thing, what are the health consequences of mold? The Dr. Shell Wellness and Aesthetic Center. I don't know what his background is. I don't know what his qualifications are. I have no idea if he cites any sources for what it is that's going on. These are things that you should do. If somebody is making a claim, you should take a look at, just quickly, I can find out in 2 or 3 minutes what's going on, click through and go, here's what it is that the consensus of actual scientific research says on these kinds of things. Why is this important? Because if you're taking medical advice from people who are not qualified to give medical advice, you run the risk of injuring your health. And so always, right, I know that there is a tendency to discount science, discount medicine, discount the establishment these days. But it turns out that, the doctors know what it is that they're talking about. And you need to be very, very careful when you go to people who don't have a medical background and follow their advice in disregard what the actual medical community is saying. And this is what I do. This is part of my process in going through and looking at it. I look at a claim. I do some research, a bunch of different places. I also have subscriptions to repositories of research journals. And so I can look for things there as well. And I'm not relying 100% on Google or Google Scholar. Both are great references, but you need to go and look at, again, what their primary source is. What are they linking through? If somebody's making a claim, what are they linking to in order to get as far back to the original primary source as we possibly can? The other reason why I want to say about this is that the claim is, the claim is about zero jitters due to a complete lack of mycotoxins, mold, yeast, and fungus. Number one is I can't find any of the research which says, mycotoxins, mold, yeast, and fungus are associated with jitteriness, number one, and that these mycotoxins, mold, yeast, and fungus cause an adrenal response, right? Thus the jitteriness, which is similar and associated with caffeine stimulation. So I did actually look for adrenal response in mold, and I can't find jitteriness as a response associated with exposure to mold, yeast, and fungus. It may be there. But I can tell you that there is a difference. There is a difference between caffeine as a stimulant and theobromine as a stimulant. So caffeine and theobromine are chemically very, very similar. I believe there's only one atom in the molecular structure which is different between the two. But caffeine is a central nervous system stimulant, and theobromine is not. So theobromine will give you this stimulation without any jitteriness associated with it. There are sometimes very, very small amounts of caffeine in cocoa and chocolate, and if you're sensitive to it, you're going to be sensitive to it. But for the most part, I don't know that, how do you get to, cacao is fermented, and it's fermented, and the first part of fermentation is yeast, and then it's spread out in the air under the sun, and it's dried, and the air is blowing over it, which means there's going to be yeast on it. If this company is who I think they are, I think the reason why they can make the claim that there's a complete lack of mycotoxins, I don't know about that, but mold, yeast, and fungus, is they actually subject the beans to hydrogen peroxide. So hydrogen peroxide, when it breaks down, turns into water. It's completely harmless unless you were to, consume it as hydrogen peroxide. That's a problem. But if you dunk something in hydrogen peroxide and then you let it evaporate, the hydrogen peroxide just breaks down into water. And so it's harmless if you wait long enough. But you can, I have heard of people using, and I believe one of the people who does this is associated with this project, if I remember correctly, is that they will soak the beans in hydrogen peroxide. That soak in the hydrogen peroxide will kill all surface bacteria, will kill all surface mold and fungus. It may sound icky, but it should not have an effect on what it is that's going on. And that might be how they're able to make the claim a complete lack of molds, yeast, and fungus on the cocoa beans. Otherwise, it's really, really hard to do. Really, really hard to do. I'm guessing they're not roasting it. So when they say 100% raw, they're not roasting. Normally we would use heat as the microbial kill step, and they're not using it here. So, okay. I still don't know about the adrenal response, and adrenal response being responsible for jitteriness. I've never heard that. In the next couple of sentences of the paragraph, they just repeat what it is that they've already said up to that point. They change the language. So rather than this being Ecuadorian Ariba cacao, they now talk about Ecuador Arabian Nacional cacao. Again, Ariba is the name of a flavor. Nacional is the name of variety. Nacional being a forastero. They talk about bringing it down from the mountainous regions via donkey back. Listen, I was in Colombia a couple of weeks ago, and they transport cocoa beans on the back of donkeys. There's nothing special about bringing this by donkey back. It just means that they don't have a road. And so they can't get a vehicle which can carry the beans down the paved road or even just a graded road easily. So there's nothing special about donkey back. It's what you use when you don't have a car. Again, they repeat the cacao, the age of the trees, not quite sure, certain why they do that. They repeat a bunch of other things, not quite sure. But then they go to make a really, really interesting case statement, which makes me, which, for me, I think is the tip off as to who their customer base is, who is they're talking to. And that is instead, right? And this is in response to the jitteriness associated with yeast contamination. Instead, our cacao beans help to create a cosmic conscious connection. Okay, I would like to see how that is done, how the beans create a cosmic conscious connection to what, right? And cause pineal gland expansion. So I did a quick search for what pineal gland expansion means. And what you'll do is you'll find that when we talk about expansion of pineal gland, you get its relation to third eye chakra and everything having to do with New Age mysticism, right? Ancient practices for pineal gland activation having to do with, so, again, here, what we're doing is we're appealing to New Age mysticism here around all this thing. And that makes sense to me after having read everything that I've done. But, you tell me in the comments, do you find this convincing? Do you have problems with any of this claims that are being made? Let me know. Do it in the chat and I can respond to it while we're here. Do you find any of this convincing? Would it be something that would cause you to go and want to purchase these products? Especially if you go take a look at the link, you can find out how much they cost. And would it make sense? Is it something that appeals to you, this representation for the cocoa here? But there are some claims that are being made here that are, in my opinion, in my experience, in my background, and with the research that I've done, are not ones that that pass muster. And I will say it that way. Some of them are just factually incorrect, and some of them make me wonder about claims that are not being made, and some that make me wonder, how do I go about and actually justify? How do I go about prove any of the things that I've said here as being true? So I want to take a quick break and say thanks to Encore Coffee, who says they're in Kansas City, Missouri, the better half. I think that anybody from Kansas City, Missouri would say that it's better than Kansas City, Kansas. I'm not sure what the people on the other side of the river might say. The reason why I mention it's just funny is I was watching a comedian by the name of Steve Hofstetter who was in Kansas, and there was some back and forth in the audience between which was better, Kansas City, Missouri, or Kansas City, Kansas, and Lawrenceville came up, and some Civil War era burning down the town of Lawrenceville. Or anyway, it was just top of mind. So when you said Kansas City, I just needed to bring that up. So Teresa, who is in Atlanta, if I recall correctly. So what do you think would be the reason for so many mistruths and questionable content? Key search words, misinformed content creator, blatant assumptions that consumers don't know any better. So the answer, it's always a challenge to attribute motivation to anybody. And I don't necessarily know that what I want to do is I want to attribute the motivation. Number one is these people just may not know. They might have been told by someone that this is what it is, and we'll get to that next. They might have been told to someone that this is what things are, and they never questioned it. And I think that's, in this particular case, that's part of it. Somebody came in and said X and Y and Z, and they said, okay, X and absolutely, this is what this is, and we'll go into this. I spent, this is maybe 2009, thereabouts, so 13, 14 years ago. I spent my time in and around members of the raw vegan community here in New York City, tried it on for a while, was working with some people in the raw chocolate space. And there is a certain set of assumptions that you have to, so a certain set of presuppositions, probably a better way to think it, that you have to buy into in order to make this work for you. And so for some people, if you've bought into, not enough, but that's not, if you have these beliefs, they're part of the way you think about food. They're part of the way you think about consciousness and life and spirituality and things like that. These kinds of things will appeal to you. So you, again, if you get, let's step back. If you get all of your information from InfoWars, for example, you'll have a very different view of the world than if you get all of your information from CNN, right? And if we're in our own little bubble, then we will tend to gravitate towards sources which reinforce what we already think is true. And so there's what's called confirmation bias. And some of these things may have to do with, I'm appealing to confirmation bias. I'm going to go to this because, the confirmation bias. And, if I've already believed something and something tells me that I'm right, I'm not likely to go and research what it is that I know is already true. People rely on that kind of stuff when they're doing it. There's a lot of really, really interesting words. Yeah, certainly keyword search, that if you were to search for some of these keywords, you'd probably find that this company, and that's maybe why it's doubled, right? So they need to get to a word count on the page. And so they're copying and pasting. So, they get their word count up and they get their keyword count up. So again, Teresa, without assuming motivation, I would say it's a combination of all of those factors which are involved in here. And Barefoot Chocolatini says, after spending so much time on farms, I just feel like this description is fluffy and awkward. Absolutely. I agree with you that it is fluffy and awkward. What it's doing is it's appealing to people who've never set foot, who don't know anything about cacao and don't know anything about cacao farms, right? But, right, they have a presupposition. There is a confirmation bias about what they're doing. And this text affirms to them what they already know, and it makes more sense. And misinformation spreads a lot faster than real information. And once misinformation is in your brain, it takes a lot to get misinformation out of your brain, especially, if what I do is the people who I met, most of them, I won't say all of them, but most of the people I met when I was doing my raw vegan stuff in 15 years ago or so, being a raw vegan was a part of their identity. They had internalized it. It was who they thought of themselves as a raw vegan. And it's really difficult when you bring something into and it becomes a part of your identity. Anything that questions what you believe actually questions your identity of who you are. And so that's one of the reasons why I think it's really, really difficult to take somebody who has a particular confirmation bias and overcome that confirmation bias. You can't show them the truth. You can't show them the facts. They're just going to say, fake news. It's like, oh no, it comes from the US government or the World Health Organization. Therefore, it's just, it's part of the deep state, right? And we can't trust it. And so there's a lot of this kind of stuff going on. Bring on the cacao ceremonies. I think that's really interesting in a way. So if we actually go back, 3,000 to 5,000 years, right? I personally think that one of the reasons why cacao was not domesticated in South America, which is where it originated, is because there were a lot easier ways to get at stimulant sources. So Guayusa tea in Ecuador, for example, mate in Brazil. So there were guarana. I mean, there were a lot easier to get at stimulants. And so I didn't need the stimulants associated with cocoa beans, right? Because there were easier ways to get at it. There were a lot more psychedelics. So ayahuasca, much more powerful. It had its own history and its own legend and lore. And so cacao, although it does have psychotropic properties, it's not nearly as strong as other things that are available. But when we transport cacao up into Mesoamerica, up modern day Belize, Guatemala, Honduras, maybe there wasn't so much psychedelics. Maybe there weren't so many stimulants in the local environment. I mean, certainly this is well before coffee. I mean, it was imported from the old world after the arrival of the Spanish. So, maybe what happened, is that they said, oh, I do notice that when I consume cocoa beans, I get a high off them. So let's see if what we can do is we can breed the cocoa so that we get a better high. Yay. I mean, that makes an enormous amount of sense, right? And there are recorded history of people setting fire to the beans and inhaling the smoke. Obviously, if somebody has had just a raw liquor, raw liquor, and consumed it, and they've done it on an empty stomach, right? And then there is a chance that they will get some sort of, I won't say intensely psychedelic experience, but they will achieve a sort of out-of-body consciousness. And so, yeah, absolutely, cacao ceremonies can be interesting in that respect. The question is, what do you attribute the effect to, right? So is it, again, connecting to a spiritual cosmic consciousness? I am inclined not to believe. But if it's like, what is the I Ching about? What are tarot cards about? They're about looking at your current situation, right? By stepping outside yourself and looking at, what the hexagrams are telling you. And maybe the hexagrams aren't telling you anything, but you're looking at your situation from a point of view you wouldn't normally have looked at it at. Or the same thing is true with tarot cards or astrology. No, I do not believe that the position of stars, hundreds of light years away, in a configuration that is accidental. We saw patterns in the sky and we created figures and gave them names and ascribed personalities and things like that. I mean, I'm not a believer in astrology in that respect at all. But if what you do is you think about it as a way of looking at the world and stepping outside yourself and taking a look at what you're doing. So rather than it being advice and rather than not being literal, that what you do is you use it as a way to consider things in a way you hadn't thought of, then it's an interesting kind of concept. But connecting with an earth goddess who is going to connect you with the consciousness, I mean, it's not something that appeals. It's not something that strikes me as being true or not. But for those people who find it valuable, find it useful, find it as a way of relaxation, calm, all of those kinds of things. It's a valuable technique and tool for them, just as yoga is, just as many other things are. So absolutely go for it. And if you're a chocolate maker and you're working with high quality beans and you don't make a ceremonial grade cacao, then you might want to consider doing it, because you can sell ceremonial grade cacao for 4 to 5 times what you can sell a chocolate bar for. Something to consider. So I want the next point in here. We spent the most of the day, the session so far, talking about this, and I wanted to talk about this specifically, but again, set up a larger framework for how to go and examine these things. And so hopefully everybody found that useful. But what I want to do is I wanted to say, why might somebody with this next one, why somebody might have this response to this text. And from what I understand, this company, Sunstore Organics, actually took over or absorbed or assumed the business operations of David Wolfe. If you're in the natural foods world, you know anything about raw cocoa, raw chocolate, or things like that, you know who David Wolfe is. What I want to do is, there's a much larger interview which is buried on this YouTube channel. It was created by a gentleman by the name of Thomas Westbrook, who's got a channel called Holy Kool-Aid. He spends a lot of time examining Christian apologetics and other topics. And this is a video that he produced about David Wolfe, who he labels, asks if he's the world's most dangerous snake oil salesman. And what I want to do is I want to play you a short excerpt from this video.
Chocolate lines up planetarily with the sun. Chocolate is an octave of sun energy. It's the energy of the center of the sun. It's a male energy that comes down off the sun, and it actually, out of all the plants, the cacao is right on line, target at the center of the sun, which we call in our body the heart. And actually, cacao is right up with the center of the sun, which is the center of the heart, which is called the sacred heart. Cacao!
So let me go back a little bit and see if we can talk about just this part of the image. What I want to say is, you may have noticed that the Earth is flat. And of course, this is a deliberate representation of what's going on. The Earth is flat. That's pretty crazy. That gives you an idea about where David is coming from. And if you're a devotee of David Wolfe, then the kind of language which shows up in the Sunstore Organics would make a lot of sense to you. There is a relationship, because I believe that the people of Sunstore Organics, or I've been led to believe that the people of Sunstore Organics assumed David Wolfe's cacao business. I also want to scroll through the end, and if you recognize this, it's from Portlandia, where the two characters decide that they want to engage in BDSM activities, and one of them has to select a safe word, and they select the word cacao is the safe word. And that's my, this is backwards, but that's where I got the idea to create a sticker. Cacao is a safe word. So you're interested in the sticker, let me know, put it in the comments here. I will send you an address where you can send a self-addressed stamped envelope, and I will send you a set of cacao is my safe word stickers. David Wolfe, go take a look at the entire video and then tell me what you think. And this guy has got millions of followers on Facebook. He's got a big Instagram following. There are people who believe in what this guy says. And if you understand that, you'll understand why people are responding to what it is that Sunstore Organics is talking about when they say pineal gland expansion and cosmic conscious connections and all those other kinds of things. So go through here and do that. I want to spend the last of the time we have here today talking about the truth about white chocolate. And this is one of the most, I think, one of the most interesting myths that probably has been around for as long as I know, and it's persistent. And even though I have done a lot to debunk it, many other people have done a lot to debunk it, it still turns out to be something that people believe in. And I found this, I was looking for something else and I found this article that does white chocolate deserve? Wow, that's an interesting question. Deserve to be called chocolate. And this is a company called a website called Truth in Advertising. And it appears to be a nonprofit. Truthinadvertising.org, right, is talking about whether or not white chocolate deserves to be called chocolate. So we looked through it. This is 2014, so it's been around for a while. So they're talking about, in reality, a better name for white chocolate. So it says, know this, white chocolate is neither white nor chocolate. So it's basically going, no, it's not. In reality, a better name for the delight would be ivory cocoa butter, but that sounds more like body wash, right, than something you'd eat. Yeah, maybe true. They get to make chocolate, real chocolate. The cocoa butter is extracted from the seeds, leaving behind a product known as chocolate liquor. The liquor is then processed, other ingredients added, and you have white chocolate. As for white chocolate, it is made only with the cocoa butter. Chocolate liquor is not used, which means white chocolate is really made from cacao vegetable fat. Okay, it's really made from cacao fat. And as a result, white chocolate doesn't contain any of the antioxidant properties that we use as an excuse to eat chocolate. So white chocolate isn't really chocolate because it doesn't contain antioxidants. That's not the way this works. All right. To some extent, the definition of how chocolate is made is true. All that said, in 2002, the FDA defined white chocolate as having a minimum of 20% cocoa butter, 14% milk solids, no more than 55% of a sweetener. But don't think that white chocolate has less fat than regular chocolate. No, white chocolate probably has more fat than a dark chocolate does, or a milk chocolate does. It's true because it doesn't. White chocolate has a fat content equal to and sometimes higher, right? Of all the chocolate, it also has the shortest shelf life. That's true. Why does white chocolate have the shortest shelf life? Because it doesn't have the antioxidants that are found in the stuff that makes chocolate brown, right? The non-fat cocoa solids. So white chocolate is, the fat is there. There's, sugar to some extent will retard the fat turning rancid, but it is the antioxidants in the cocoa powder that keep the chocolate from going rancid fast. So now they say, now that you've been convinced that white chocolate isn't really chocolate, they haven't made a convincing argument to me. All they've said is that it's made from vegetable fat. Well, yeah, it is. And it doesn't contain antioxidants. Well, no, it doesn't. But antioxidants are not the definition of what chocolate is or isn't. They've also said, okay, the FDA, right, has defined what white chocolate is. Yeah, they did that. And let me see if I've got the right link. I know I have it in another browser. So let me see if I can go here. Let me show that up. So if we want to go and find out what chocolate is, right, we need to go here to this part of the Code of Federal Regulations. So the Code of Federal Regulations is the documentation in US law of what is what, right? And what we do is we find to go to Title 21, which talks about foods for human consumption. We go to Part 163, which is when they talk about cacao products. And we scroll down. By the way, I'm going to schedule just a deep dive into this document on its own a week from today. We can go through every single one of these sections so you have an idea about what chocolate is and what chocolate isn't. So we scroll down here to 124, which is the section where they talk about what white chocolate is. And we're going to go and just bring that up. So what is white chocolate? So white chocolate is a food prepared by mixing and grinding cacao fat, okay, with one or more optional dairy ingredients, with one or more nutritive carbohydrate sweeteners, and there can be other ingredients, right? So white chocolate shall be free of coloring material. That's why it's ivory colored, right? Most cocoa butter, which is, even if it's been deodorized, will be off-white, and that's why white chocolate is not pure white, right? And it not being pure white, right? And it being an ivory white, it's not a reason for it not to be chocolate, right? It's a really, really bad argument. It's like, it's not chocolate because it doesn't contain antioxidants. No, right? The standard of identity for white chocolate says you need to use cocoa fat, right? And it needs to be at least 20% by weight of cocoa fat, right? and finished chocolate cannot have less than 3.5% by weight of milk fat and no more than 14% milk solids, right? And no more than 55% nutritive carbohydrate sweetener, sugar, right? Or some sugar replacement. We can now use non-nutritive sweeteners as well. All right. So as long as the product meets that definition, it can legally be called white chocolate. So I can add nutritive carbohydrate sweeteners, sugar. I can add cream, milk, fat, butter, all these dairy ingredients, milk, dry, whole milk, concentrated milk, evaporated milk, sweetened condensed milk, skim milk, right? In addition to whole milk, cream, I can use buttermilk, and I can use malted milk, right? I can add emulsifying agents, lecithin, for example, PGPR, where you use singly or in combination, as long as the total doesn't exceed 1.5% by weight, 1.5% per weight. And then I can use spices. This might include vanilla, right? Or any other things. As long as these do not impart a flavor that imitates the flavor of chocolate, milk, or butter. So I can use any flavoring I want in the chocolate, and I can call it chocolate, as long as it is a natural or artificial flavoring, ground meats. So I could add this gianduja would fit in here because I could add ground whole nut meats into the white chocolate. I could use ground coffee beans, in which case it wouldn't be white anymore. Dried malted cereal extract, so malted milk. I can add salt, and I can add other things. I can add antioxidants, which is interesting, and I can add whey or whey products. And one of the reasons why I might use something, for example, like butter or anhydrous milk fat or a whey product is that they will interfere with the crystallization of the cocoa butter. It will slow down the formation of form 6 crystals from form 5 crystals, therefore extending the shelf life without actually it being called a preservative. So very, very cool. Notice I can't add palm oil here. I can't add coconut oil here. I can't use any fat that is not a cocoa butter fat, a cocoa derived fat. That's really, really important. It's one way in which the US is, their classification for chocolate is more strict than the rest of the world, where a lot of our food regulations are not quite as strict. This is it. And what it says is the name of the food. So any food which adheres to these regulations, these ingredients, right, is called white chocolate, right? It's called white chocolate coating when it uses a non-cocoa butter fat in it, right? When one or more of the spices, flavors, or seasons is used, you have to have flavored within it, right? So if you're going to include for example, coffee beans, it would be white chocolate flavored with coffee. If in the ingredients, so where it says ingredients, you say white chocolate, and in it says cocoa butter, blah, 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 you'd have to include it in that definition, right? And then, and that includes, by the way, I believe salt. If you're going to add salt, you need to include it in the ingredients declaration. And there are, down here in section D, also really important, is there are label declarations, which is how am I going to list on the label of the chocolate what, in fact, these things are. And I think that the part of this is which is really, really confusing to people is that what we find out is that this standard of identity didn't exist until 2002. And it didn't come into effect until 2004. And so the idea that white chocolate is legally chocolate is actually comparatively recent. White chocolate was introduced, I believe, by Nestle in 1936, 1937, something like that. It's a way of using extra cocoa butter that they had lying around before the war. And for many, many years, there was not a standard of identity in the Code of Federal Regulations for white chocolate. Well, what happened is the companies would go to the FDA and they'd say, we'd like for you to issue for us what's called a temporary marketing permit. So we've got a product. It doesn't adhere specifically to the standards of identity. But what we want you to do is we want you to give us a piece of paper that says we can legally call this white chocolate. And so between 1936, 37, and 2002, that's what all the big companies did. Every other year, they went to the FDA and said, would you please issue us a temporary marketing permit? Here's our recipe. You can see that it conforms to standard of identity for chocolate, and there's nothing here that shouldn't be there. We just want to call it white chocolate. And eventually they got tired of doing it, right? And they went to a fairly intense lobbying campaign in the late 1990s, and they convinced the FDA to actually add a standard of identity to white chocolate to the Code of Federal Regulations. So if anybody tells you that white chocolate is not chocolate for any reason whatsoever, right, you just point them to CFR 21.163.124 and you say, absolutely, there is such a thing as white chocolate. And by the way, there is a similar standard for white chocolate in other parts of the world. So that's not just the US, but if you go to Europe, there's a similar standard. If you go to the UK, there's a similar standard. There is a global document. It's not really a standard, but it's sort of a harmonization of different regulations called the Codex Alimentarius, and you'll find a similar kind of declaration in the Codex Alimentarius. So I will say that if you're you go to the Chocolate Life, there is a link to the Code of Federal Regulations. So the particular page that I was just looking at, this page here, there is a link on the Chocolate Life to take you to that page. So, and then I wrote an article for the Chocolate Life a couple of years ago. Yes, Virginia, there is such a thing as white chocolate, where again, I talk about this, and you can read that article. What this tells me is that even in sources, right, that set themselves up to be declarative, right, we are truth in advertising, you still need to take the representation they make with a grain of salt. It's really, really important. I mean, I'm just lucky that this is a topic I have educated myself on. So when I go to any other page on this website, right, I am going to ask myself the question. So, for example, there is another, you can see below, what does Belgian and Belgian chocolate mean, right? So I did a little research on truth in advertising. It turns out that Godiva, we think of it as the quintessential brand, Belgian brand, although it was brought to prominence in the United States by the Campbell Soup Company in the late 60s, early 1970s. They're part of a global prestige brand image marketing campaign, right? But it's been an American company since 1973, and most of the production for Godiva, or a bunch of the production, has been here in the United States. And this class action lawsuit is about whether or not a company, somebody would be confused by thinking that that Godiva was actually manufactured in Belgium, given the trade dress, what it said on the labeling, as opposed to it being actually made in the United States or Belgium. So is there confusion? Do I have a standing to sue Godiva for misrepresentation? Now, the reason why I actually know that the little bit of what they're saying here is true is that I actually was retained as an expert witness for one of these two lawsuits. And so I had to go and jump in and get myself versed on what the theory of the case was, as well as give my impression on what the theory of the case was, and get prepped to be able to go in front of a jury and talk about that. So in this particular case, I happen to know, what stuff is, and I can share it here with you. But what this means for me is that everything now that I read on this website, Truth in Advertising, I cannot take as being true. I have to take it with a grain of salt, and I have to do research, which says, are they in fact representing it? You can say anytime in the headline, right, does white chocolate deserve? This is a clue that they're making a case, right? And they have a presupposition, and they're going to reach a conclusion which they have started with in advance. So something called begging the question. When we talk about fallacious reasoning, I mean, anytime you see loaded language like that in a headline, that they're trying to sell you something rather than, or they're trying to sell you an opinion to try to tell you, and it may not be literally true. So that's another clue. And that's, part of what it is that I wanted to do today over the course of the hour, is to give you some of that background into some of what this means, and how you can go and take a look at things and learn this stuff for yourself and make your own representation. But also, when you're going out there and you're making representations to your customers on your packaging, to other kinds of people, this is the kind of research you want to do to make sure that you are in fact making claims which are in fact defensible. And so hopefully there's some resources here that you can use. There's some resources at the bottom. We've got the full YouTube link. There's also a playlist here. So this is the YouTube playlist. This is the first video in the playlist, but there are 9 different videos, which I consider to be, okay, are we spreading dangerous information, or we need to look very carefully at what it is being said. So you can use those as, oh, I'm going to read through them. What do I think is dangerous or not dangerous about them, right? What kind of misinformation are they presenting? And let me know in the comments if this is something that you'd like me to do in the future. Go through each one of these, or if there are several of these videos you think would be interesting. What is dangerous about them? What do I think is dangerous about them? I would be happy to go and go into more detail about it. This is a post that I did, and some of the videos which are in the playlist are listed in here, and so you can learn more about them as well. So that's it today for the Chocolate Life Live. What I want to do is thank everybody for joining me today. If you have been watching on LinkedIn, YouTube, or Facebook, and thank you everybody who's sent me a comment. Let me know where you're listening into, asked a question. I appreciate that very much. If you haven't had an opportunity, if you're watching on YouTube, you can smash the like button. If you're not subscribing to the Chocolate Wire channel on YouTube, I appreciate you're doing that. If you're watching on Facebook, again, thumbs up. If you're watching on LinkedIn, would love to see you to smash the like button, but also over on TheChocolateLife.com to go and join. This is how I support myself. There is a join link. There's always a free level. I mean, you can subscribe. I send newsletters out on a fairly irregular basis to the entire membership, usually not more than once or twice a month. But you do get those newsletters, and when you sign in, you have an opportunity to comment on the Chocolate Life itself. So you do that. If you do have some spare change, I know that given inflation and everything else that's been going on, the pandemic for the last couple of years, the dollars that have are much harder to figure out how to parse them out and who to give them to. The generous support of members is one of the things that has enabled me to be able to continue through the bulk of the pandemic and through coming out the other side. And I appreciate everything that everybody has done, all the support that they have shown me, and appreciate that. I also want to say that this coming Sunday for members, there's going to be an Ask Me Anything Google Meet call. It's Sunday from 11 to 12:30 here in Eastern Daylight Time. I'm going to be sending out an email this afternoon to all members. It's going to be the email about Tuesday's live stream. So this coming Tuesday's live stream is about tasting. So the technique I learned to taste my palate, or train my palate, not taste my palate. It's the techniques I used, I invented, I think. To train my palate and give you the philosophical background, give you some of the story, all this other kind of stuff. And I'm going to give a demonstration of how these things work in practice. So it's how I learned to taste anything is going to be the topic for this coming Tuesday's live stream. So I hope you can join me then. But also in that email, I'm going to be sending the link to Sunday's Ask Me Anything Google Meet. So I'm going to wait for an hour or two. So if you're watching now, you can go to the Chocolate Life. You can join even as a free membership, so that you have an opportunity in a couple of hours, when I send out the email, you will get that email with the link to Sunday's live stream, Sunday's Ask Me Anything call. And with that, one final one final comment from Courtney. I don't know where you're located, Courtney, but thank you very much for participating today. Super interesting. Thanks for the presentation. Thank you very much. One of the reasons why I do these things, and not just for you, not just for the people who are watching, the people who are watching live, the people who are going to catch this in a replay next week or next month or next year. And by the way, all these things are archived, right? If you want to share it, you can go to LinkedIn or Facebook or to the YouTube channel, and you can share it with colleagues, share it with friends, share it with anybody you think might be interested in learning this. Is that my preparation for all of these live streams, right, is important for me in terms of clarifying what it is that I talk about, and how it is that I approach these. These gives me an opportunity when I'm not in daily meetings with colleagues, when I don't have an opportunity to sit in front of people on a regular basis. This regular series of live streams enables me to pick topics that are of interest to me, things that I'm interested in, things that I may be struggling with for a client, things that I'm writing about for a magazine article or something like that, and work through the concepts. And for me, it's often really, really helpful to hear myself say things out loud, right? So that there's a sort of, I think, some different ability to understand the truth proposition of something when you hear it being said as opposed to just reading it. And so I just really want to say thank you, everybody, for being here and supporting what it is that I'm doing, because it gives me an opportunity, I hope, it gives me an opportunity to be a better communicator. And Courtney, Colorado, a lovely state. Been there many, many times. I appreciate a lot of the places that I've been on the Arkansas River, or Kansas River, excuse me very much, and my chocolate friends in the state. And if I don't know if you've had an opportunity to go to Atelier Ortega, so Oscar Ortega, I believe it's in Jackson Hole. If you know his work, it's absolutely great work. And if not, I can recommend a trip to Jackson Hole for the chocolate, if not for the skiing. And with that, I want to remind everybody, we'll be back here on Tuesday next week with How I Learned to Taste Anything, where I'll give you the insight into how I trained my palate. And starting back in 1994, this was before there were any training programs on tasting chocolate. So not only did I need to understand what I needed to know to become a chocolate critic, I needed to understand how I needed to taste chocolate. So I want to give everybody an insight into what it is I did at that time to train myself. And in the meantime, everybody have a great weekend. And please remember, if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong.